Montana Territory, 1885. A stagecoach rattles across the rugged landscape, carrying Eleanor Mills toward a future she can only imagine. Tucked in her valise is a well-worn letter from a man named Thomas Blackwood, promising her land, security, and a respectable life as his wife. After losing everything in Boston, this mail-order arrangement seemed her only hope. But what awaits her at Whispering Pines Ranch isn't the burly, bearded husband she expected, but a secret that will change her life forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stagecoach hit another rut, jolting Eleanor awake. She straightened, smoothing her travel-worn skirts and peering through the dust-caked window at the sprawling Montana wilderness. 3 weeks of travel had left her exhausted, her once pristine blue traveling dress now rumpled and stained. But appearance hardly mattered now. She was mere hours away from meeting her future husband. "First time in Montana Territory, miss?" asked the elderly woman sitting across from her, knitting needles clicking rhythmically. "Yes," Eleanor replied, tucking a strand of auburn hair back into her loosening bun. "I'm to be married." The woman's eyebrows rose slightly. "Mail order." Eleanor nodded, her cheeks warming. There was no shame in it. Thousands of women had made similar journeys west, but the circumstances that had driven her to this point still stung. At 26, she'd been firmly on the shelf in Boston society, especially after her father's banking scandal had left the family destitute. When he took his own life and her mother succumbed to grief shortly after, Eleanor had been left with nothing but debts and whispers following her through the streets. The advertisement in the matrimonial news had seemed like divine intervention. "Rancher seeks educated, resilient wife. Must appreciate hard work and solitude, property and security offered in exchange for companionship and domestic assistance." Thomas Blackwood's letters had been brief but kind. He described his ranch, Whispering Pines, as modest but growing, with a new 2-story house built just last year. He'd been straightforward about the isolation and the harsh winters, but also wrote of the breathtaking beauty of the land and the freedom it offered. "Blackwood Ranch." The woman's knitting paused. "You're Thomas Blackwood's mail order?" Eleanor nodded, suddenly alert. "You know him?" The woman resumed her knitting, eyes fixed on the yarn. "Folks know of the Blackwood place. Been some trouble out that way." Trouble. Eleanor's throat tightened. Indians, rustlers, land disputes, the usual territorial growing pains, the woman said vaguely. "Thomas keeps to himself mostly." "Odd fellow." Eleanor's fingers found the letter in her pocket, tracing its edges. Thomas had been candid about the challenges of ranch life, but had mentioned nothing of specific dangers. Of course, what man would admit such things when trying to secure a bride? "We're approaching Riverford," called the driver. The small town appeared. On the horizon, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the banks of a wide river. Eleanor gathered her few belongings, heart pounding. This was the last outpost of civilization before Whispering Pines Ranch. Thomas had written he would meet her here. When the stagecoach rolled to a stop on Riverford's dusty main street, Eleanor peered anxiously through the window. Several men loitered outside the general store, but none approached the coach. The driver opened the door, offering his hand. "This is your stop, Miss Mills." Eleanor descended shakily, scanning the street. "I was to be met by Mr. Blackwood," the driver shrugged. "Sometimes folks run late. You can wait in the hotel there." He nodded toward a 2-story building with a faded sign. "Stagecoach doesn't... Wait, though. Got a schedule." As the driver unloaded her trunk, Eleanor felt a wave of panic. What if Thomas had changed his mind? What if he'd never intended to come at all? She was nearly 2,000 miles from Boston with less than $20 to her name, Miss Mills. Eleanor turned to find a slight figure approaching, a young man in his early 20s, she guessed, wearing worn ranch clothes and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. He had delicate features, high cheekbones, and startlingly blue eyes that seemed vaguely familiar. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "Jackson Cooper, ma'am. I work at Whispering Pines." He removed his hat, revealing short-cropped dark hair. "Mr. Blackwood sent me to fetch you. There was trouble at the north pasture, broken fence, scattered cattle. He sends his apologies." Eleanor studied the young man. His hands were calloused from hard work, but they looked too small for a ranch hand. His voice was peculiar too, not deep, but rather deliberately gruff, as if he were straining to lower it. "I see," she said finally. "And when will I meet Mr. Blackwood?" "Tonight, ma'am, at the ranch. It's a 2-hour ride from here." He gestured to a wagon parked nearby. "I've brought the wagon for your things." Eleanor hesitated. This wasn't how she had imagined her arrival. Thomas's letters had promised he would personally escort her from Riverford. But if there was ranch trouble, very well, Mr. Cooper. The journey to Whispering Pines passed in relative silence. Jackson Cooper wasn't inclined to conversation, answering Eleanor's questions with polite but brief responses. The landscape grew increasingly wild and beautiful, rolling foothills rising to meet distant mountains, meadows carpeted with wildflowers, and stands of towering pines. Despite her apprehension, Eleanor found herself captivated by the raw beauty of the territory. "Have you worked for Mr. Blackwood long?" she asked as they forded a shallow stream. "4 years now," Cooper replied, eyes fixed on the trail ahead. "Since the beginning." "What kind of man is he?" Eleanor ventured. "His letters were somewhat reserved." Cooper's hands tightened on the reins. "Fair, hard-working. I expect the same from others." After a pause, he added, "Not much for words, but means what he says." "And the ranch, is it prosperous?" "Getting. And there. Started with nothing but a claim and 30 head of cattle. Now we've got over 200 good grazing land and the house." Pride crept into Cooper's voice. "Built it ourselves last summer. 2 stories, solid pine. Even got glass windows shipped from Denver." Eleanor tried to picture Thomas Blackwood, the man she'd agreed to marry, sight unseen. His letters had described him as 36 years old, of average height and build, with dark hair beginning to grey. Not handsome, he'd written, with refreshing honesty, but healthy and capable. He'd been a Union soldier, then worked cattle drives from Texas before claiming his Montana homestead. As the wagon crested a final hill, Whispering Pines Ranch came into view. A 2-story cabin nestled in a grove of tall pines with several outbuildings. Nearby, a sturdy corral held several horses, and in the distance cattle grazed on rolling pastures. Smoke curled from the cabin's stone chimney. It was modest compared to the Boston homes Eleanor had known, but in this setting it looked like a palace. "Home," Cooper said simply, a note of genuine affection in his voice. As they approached, Eleanor noticed more details. The carefully tended vegetable garden beside the house, the hand-carved porch railings, the curtains visible in the windows. Someone had planted wildflowers along the path to the front door. These weren't touches she'd expected from a bachelor rancher. Cooper brought the wagon to a stop before the porch. "I'll bring your trunk in. Mr. Blackwood should be back by supper." Eleanor descended from the wagon on unsteady legs, smoothing her wrinkled dress and wishing she could freshen up before meeting her future husband. The front door opened, and a plump, middle-aged woman with graying hair emerged, wiping her hands on an apron. "You must be Miss Mills. I'm Martha Watson, cook and housekeeper." She hurried down the steps with a warm smile. Come in, come in. You must be exhausted from your journey." The interior of the house surprised Eleanor. It was simple but comfortable, with polished wooden floors, sturdy furniture, and even a small bookshelf filled with volumes. A quilted settee sat before the stone fireplace, and the dining table was already set for dinner with surprisingly fine china. "Let me show you to your room," Martha said, leading Eleanor up a narrow staircase. "You can rest and wash up before dinner. Thomas, Mr. Blackwood, insisted you have the largest bedroom." The bedroom was small by Boston standards, but featured a handsome maple bed with a colourful quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a chest of drawers. Sunlight streamed through curtained windows that overlooked the valley. "It's lovely," Eleanor said honestly. "Thomas wanted everything nice for you," Martha said, pouring water into the basin. "Never seen him so particular about anything. Had me order that quilt special from the back east." Eleanor unlaced her boots, relieved to free her swollen feet. "Mr. Cooper said there was trouble with the cattle?" Martha's hands stilled momentarily. "Yes, broken fence. Happens regularly now." She pursed her lips. "I should let Thomas explain." Eleanor sensed there was more to the story, but didn't press. "How many people work here?" "Just me, Jackson, and Thomas full-time. The Larson boys from the next valley help during carving and branding." Martha hung a towel beside the basin. "I'll let you rest. Dinner's at 6. Left alone, Eleanor unpacked her meagre belongings, changed into her second-best dress, a sage green cotton with minimal wrinkles, and attempted to revive her travel-worn appearance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The mirror revealed a tired woman with shadows beneath her hazel eyes, her auburn hair falling from its pins. She hadn't always looked so worn, but the past year had taken its toll. By 6 o'clock, Eleanor had made herself as presentable as possible and descended to the main room, but Thomas Blackwood had still not returned. Martha served a delicious meal of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh-baked bread, apologizing repeatedly for the master's absence. "Never missed welcoming a guest before," Martha fretted. "Must be serious business." Jackson Cooper ate quickly and excused himself, mumbling about evening chores. As twilight deepened into night, Eleanor's apprehension grew. Had her future husband deliberately avoided their first meeting? "Perhaps I should retire," Eleanor suggested as Martha cleared the dishes. "It's been a long journey." "Give him another hour," Martha urged. "He'll be greatly disappointed to miss you on your first night." Eleanor settled by the fire with one of the books from the shelf, a collection of Tennyson's poems, surprisingly. The volume fell open to "The Lady of Shalott," the margins filled with neat annotations in a thoughtful hand. This didn't match the image of the plain-spoken rancher she'd imagined. The clock had just struck 9 when hoofbeats approached the house. Eleanor's heart leapt to her throat as boots thumped on the porch. Martha hurried to open the door. "About time, the poor girl's been waiting hours." "I know, Martha, there was trouble." The voice was breathless, but unmistakably female. Eleanor rose, book slipping from her fingers, as Jackson Cooper stepped through the doorway, except it wasn't quite Jackson Cooper anymore. The hat was gone, revealing the same dark, cropped hair, but the posture had changed. No longer hunched and deliberately masculine, but straight-backed and unmistakably feminine, despite the men's clothing. "Miss Mills," said the woman who had been Jackson Cooper, blue eyes meeting Eleanor's directly now. "I'm Teresa Blackwood. There is no Thomas." Eleanor felt the room tilt. "I don't understand." Teresa Blackwood removed her dusty coat, revealing a slender frame bound tightly with cloth at the chest. "I'm afraid I've deceived you. There is no Thomas Blackwood. There never was. I'm the owner of Whispering Pines." Martha pushed a chair behind Eleanor, just as her knees buckled. "You lied to me," Eleanor whispered. "All those letters—" "Yes." Teresa didn't flinch from the accusation. "But everything else was true, about the ranch, the life here, the security offered. But why? Why this deception?" Teresa ran a hand through her short hair, exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. A woman alone can't hold land in the territory, not really. Can't get loans, can't sign contracts, can't be taken seriously. But Thomas Blackwood, Union veteran and cattle rancher. She shrugged. He can. You've been pretending to be a man for 4 years? Eleanor's mind reeled. Longer. Since the war ended. Teresa's expression hardened. I worked as a nurse. When my brother died at Antietam, I took his identity. It was the only way to claim the veteran's land grant, the only way to have something of my own. Martha placed a cup of tea in Eleanor's trembling hands. Teresa built everything you see from nothing, all by herself, with just a little help. And you needed a wife because... Eleanor couldn't finish the question. Teresa paced before the fire. 2 reasons. First, practical. I need help running this place. Martha's getting older, and I can't be both Thomas and Teresa forever. She paused, vulnerability flashing across her face. Second, loneliness. I thought perhaps I could find someone who might understand, who might eventually accept the truth. And if I don't? Eleanor asked quietly. If I want to return to Boston? Teresa nodded as if expecting this. I'll give you the money for your return journey and a little extra. I won't hold you to any commitment made under false pretenses. Eleanor studied the woman before her, exhausted, dusty from a day's hard work, but standing tall despite it all. This was the person who had built this home, who had annotated Tennyson, who had ordered a special quilt for a stranger's comfort. You said there was trouble today, Eleanor said finally. With the cattle. Surprise flickered in Teresa's eyes at the change of subject. Yes, cut fence on the north pasture. 20 heads missing. 3rd time this year. Who would do such a thing? The Hargrove brothers. They want this land, the water rights especially. They've been trying to drive me out since I arrived. Teresa's jaw tightened. They've figured out I'm alone here most days with just Martha. They're getting bolder, and that's the real reason you advertise for a wife, Eleanor realized. You need someone else here, someone to maintain the appearance while you're working the range. Teresa nodded slowly. I need someone to be Mrs. Blackwood when Thomas is away, to receive visitors, handle correspondence, be seen in town occasionally, to help protect what I've built. Eleanor rose, walking to the window to gaze out at the darkened ranch. In the glass, she could see her reflection overlaid on the Montana night, a proper Boston lady, out of place and time. Behind her, reflected too, stood Teresa Blackwood, a woman who had forged her own destiny against all odds. You must think me terribly deceitful, Teresa said quietly. Eleanor turned from the window. Yes, I do. She took a deep breath. But I also think you are incredibly brave. Something like hope flickered in Teresa's blue eyes. I won't decide tonight, Eleanor continued. I need time to consider everything, but I won't leave immediately either. Relief visibly washed over Teresa. That's fair, more than fair. I will need to understand everything. This ranch, your situation, these Hargroves. No more deceptions. Agreed. Teresa extended her hand, then hesitated, as if unsure whether the gesture was appropriate. Eleanor regarded the offered hand, calloused, strong, but undeniably feminine now that she knew to look. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. Teresa's grip was firm, honest. Tomorrow, Eleanor said, you will show me everything about Whispering Pines, and then we'll discuss what happens next. Teresa nodded solemnly. Tomorrow. As Eleanor climbed the stairs to her bedroom that night, her mind whirled with contradictory emotions. She had traveled across the continent to marry a man who didn't exist. Yet the woman who had taken his place had built something remarkable here. A home, a business, a life on her own terms. Perhaps, Eleanor thought as she gazed out her bedroom window at the star-filled Montana sky, she had not come all this way for nothing. Perhaps there was a place for her at Whispering Pines after all, not as the wife she had expected to be, but as something else entirely. Something new, something of her own choosing. For the first time since leaving Boston, Eleanor smiled. October painted the Montana landscape in vibrant golds and crimsons. The harvest dinner had yielded unexpected dividends beyond community goodwill. Mr. Winter's promised affidavit arrived by messenger, along with a detailed map of water diversions on his property. 3 other neighboring ranchers sent letters, expressing similar concerns about the Hargroves, offering their own testimonies if needed. "We could have a case," Teresa said, spreading the documents across the kitchen table one morning. "If we petition the territorial court in Helena." "We should go in person," Eleanor suggested, pouring coffee for them both. "Documents can be ignored or lost. People are harder to dismiss." Teresa's brow furrowed. "I'd need to be Thomas throughout." "Not necessarily." Eleanor sat beside her, warming her hands on her coffee cup. "The petition would be filed by Thomas, Blackwood and his wife, but if I traveled to Helena first, alone, I could meet with the court clerk, establish the groundwork. You could join me after, reducing your time in public. It's risky." "Everything about our situation is risky," Eleanor countered, "but winter's coming. If we don't act before the passes snow over, we'll face another season of Hargrove harassment." With no recourse. After days of deliberation, they formulated a plan. Eleanor would travel to Helena by stagecoach, taking the affidavits and documentation. She would consult with a lawyer Teresa knew, to be unsympathetic to the Hargroves, then secure accommodations for Teresa's arrival 3 days later. The morning of Eleanor's departure dawned clear and cold. She dressed in her best traveling suit, navy wool, that Martha had skillfully altered to the current fashion, and packed the precious documents in a leather portfolio. "Be careful," Teresa said, helping Eleanor into the wagon that would take her to the Riverford stage station. "Helena's different from Riverford. More strangers, more questions. I've managed Boston society. I can handle a territorial capital." Eleanor smiled, though anxiety fluttered in her stomach. It would be her first journey alone since arriving at Whispering Pines. "Remember to check the south fence line while I'm gone. The wires were loose when we rode past yesterday." "Yes, Ma'am," Teresa replied with mock solemnity, but her eyes betrayed genuine concern. 3 days. "I'll meet you at the International Hotel by noon on Friday." The journey to Helena proved longer and more arduous than Eleanor had anticipated. The stagecoach was crowded, the roads rough from early autumn rains. A broken wheel delayed them overnight in a whistle-stop settlement consisting of little more than a trading post and livery stable. When Eleanor finally reached Helena, she was exhausted and rumpled, but the sight of the bustling territorial capital revived her spirits. Unlike rugged Riverford, Helena boasted proper streets, substantial brick buildings, and the unmistakable energy of a growing city. She secured a modest but clean room at the International Hotel, then set about her mission. Mr. Lawrence, the lawyer, Teresa had recommended, received her with professional courtesy that warmed considerably when she presented Winter's affidavit and the supporting documents. "This is precisely the type of evidence needed to bring action against the Hargroves," he said, examining the materials with growing interest. "Their influence has prevented many such complaints from proceeding, but with multiple witnesses and documented incidents, can we secure a hearing?" Eleanor asked. "Better than that." Lawrence's eyes gleamed. "Judge Blackburn arrives next week for the quarterly territorial court session. He has no love for the Hargroves after they attempted to bribe his clerk last spring. If we present this petition properly, we might secure not just a hearing, but an injunction against further incursions on your property while the case proceeds." Eleanor left the lawyer's office with cautious optimism and a list of additional documentation that would strengthen their case. She spent the afternoon writing detailed notes for Teresa, then treated herself to dinner in the hotel's dining room, her first restaurant meal since leaving Boston. As she lingered over apple pie, Eleanor became aware of eyes upon her. A well-dressed man at a nearby table had been watching her with undisguised interest. When she met his gaze directly, he smiled and inclined his head in greeting. Under normal circumstances, Eleanor would have ignored such forward behavior, but something in the man's expression, calculation beneath the charm, raised her guard. She finished her dessert quickly and returned to her room, double-checking the lock on her door. The next morning, Eleanor ventured out to complete errands before Teresa's arrival. Eleanor offered amenities unavailable in Riverford: a proper bookstore, a millinery shop, even a photographer's studio. She purchased several books on animal husbandry and ranch management, ordered winter fabric for new curtains, and on impulse had her photograph taken to commemorate her first independent journey. Leaving the photographer's studio, Eleanor nearly collided with the man from the dining room. "Mrs. Blackwood, isn't it?" His smile revealed perfect teeth beneath a neatly trimmed moustache. "Frederick Hargrove, I believe you're acquainted with my father and brothers." Ice flooded Eleanor's veins, but she maintained her composure. "Mr. Hargrove, I wasn't aware that any of the family ventured this far from Riverford. Business diversification." He gestured to a nearby building bearing the sign Hargrove Mercantile and Banking. "My territory extends beyond cattle, unlike my more rustic relatives." His eyes, Eleanor noted, held the same cold calculation as his father's, despite his refined appearance and educated speech. "How fortunate for you," she replied neutrally. "If you'll excuse me, I have appointments to keep." "Of course," Frederick blocked her path subtly. "Though I'd welcome the opportunity to discuss the unfortunate situation between our families. Perhaps over dinner. My father's methods lack finesse, but his concerns about water rights are legitimate. I believe we could reach an amicable solution. Any discussions regarding Whispering Pines should include my husband," Eleanor said firmly. "Naturally. Is Thomas joining you in Helena?" The casual inquiry confirmed Eleanor's suspicions. Frederick Hargrove had recognized her at dinner, had likely been informed of her arrival, and was now fishing for information about Teresa's whereabouts. "Good day, Mr. Hargrove." Eleanor stepped around him. "Any communication regarding our properties should be directed through our respective lawyers." She felt his eyes following her down the street and resisted the urge to quicken her pace. Back in her hotel room, she penned an urgent note to Mr. Lawrence, informing him of the encounter, then began drafting a letter to Teresa, intending to dispatch it with the afternoon stage to Riverford. Before she could complete it, a knock came at her door. Cautiously, she called, "Who is it?" "Telegraph for Mrs. Blackwood," came the reply. Eleanor opened the door to find a hotel porter holding a yellow telegram slip. She tipped him, then closed and locked the door before reading the message. "Fence cut again. Stop. 50 head missing. Stop. Delayed by 2 days. Stop." The terseness of the message conveyed more than its sparse words. Another raid, significant losses, and now Teresa wouldn't arrive in Helena until Sunday, 2 days after their planned meeting, and dangerously close to the court session. Eleanor paced her small room, mind racing. The timing was too convenient. Frederick Hargrove's presence in Helena, the cattle raid just as they prepared their legal challenge. The Hargroves were clearly coordinating their efforts to undermine Whispering Pines before they could secure legal protection. Should she delay the court filing, return to the ranch? Neither option seemed wise. Abandoning their legal strategy would play into the Hargroves' hands, but proceeding without Teresa carried its own risks. After hours of deliberation, Eleanor made her decision. She would continue as planned, preparing the petition with Lawrence while awaiting Teresa's delayed arrival. But she would also take precautions against further Hargrove interference. The next morning, she relocated to a different hotel under the name Eleanor Mills, leaving instructions with the International's desk clerk to deliver any messages for Mrs. Blackwood to her new location. She arranged for Lawrence's clerk to accompany her on all excursions through the city, providing a measure of protection and a witness to any further Hargrove approaches. Most crucially, she sent a detailed message to Teresa by private courier, rather than the public stage, warning of Frederick's presence in Helena and suggesting alternate accommodations upon her arrival. Friday passed without incident, then Saturday. By Sunday morning, Eleanor's anxiety had reached fever pitch. She stationed herself in the lobby of Teresa's designated hotel shortly before noon, watching each arrival with mounting concern. At 1:30, a trail-worn figure entered. Teresa in her Thomas Blackwood guise, dusty from travel, but blessedly intact. Eleanor approached casually as a wife greeting her husband and embraced her briefly. "Frederick Hargrove is watching the International Hotel," she whispered. "He's been asking about you." Teresa nodded almost imperceptibly. "Room secure?" "Yes, backstairs are accessible." Once safely behind closed doors, Teresa shed her hat and coat with a groan of relief. "Brutal ride. Had to take the long route after I spotted Hargrove men watching the main road." "Tell me everything," Eleanor insisted, pouring water for washing. The raid had been the worst yet. Not just cut fences, but a blaze set in the north pasture hay storage. Teresa and Martha had fought the fire through the night while the cattle were driven off. By morning, the fire was contained, but the damage was significant. "Martha's staying with the Petersons until I return," Teresa concluded, wincing as she removed her boots to reveal blistered feet. Not safe alone at the ranch now. Eleanor knelt to examine Teresa's injuries, her heart constricting at the angry red welts. "You fought the fire in these boots? It's a wonder you can walk at all." "Had no choice." As Eleanor gently bathed the blistered feet, a new determination crystallized within her. "This ends now. The Hargroves must be stopped, not just legally, but definitively." "What are you thinking?" Teresa asked, studying Eleanor's expression. "Frederick Hargrove is the key. He's the respectable face of the family, managing their financial interests here in Helena." Eleanor began applying salve to the worst blisters. "His presence when our legal challenge emerges is no coincidence. You think he's here to block our petition?" "I think he's here to ensure we never file it." Eleanor's voice hardened. "But he's miscalculated. He doesn't know who he's facing." The next morning, while Teresa rested her injured feet, Eleanor met with Lawrence to finalize their petition. The lawyer was pleased with their documentation, but concerned about potential Hargrove interference. "Judge Blackburn arrives tomorrow. Ideally, we should file immediately upon his arrival, before opposing. Interests can influence the docket." "We'll be ready," Eleanor assured him. Returning to their hotel, she found Teresa restless despite her injuries. "I've been thinking about Frederick," Teresa said. "If he's managing their banking interests, he might be vulnerable in ways his father isn't," Eleanor finished, their thoughts aligning. "Exactly. Financial misconduct carries penalties even Hargrove influence can't easily dismiss." They spent the afternoon developing a two-pronged strategy, proceeding with their water rights petition while simultaneously investigating Frederick Hargrove's business practices. Teresa drafted a letter to a former Army colleague now working in the Territorial Banking Commission, requesting discreet inquiries. Tuesday dawned clear and cool, the day of Judge Blackburn's arrival and their scheduled court filing. Teresa bound her feet despite the pain, dressed meticulously as Thomas Blackwood, and accompanied Eleanor to the courthouse. They arrived early, joining Lawrence on the courthouse steps to await the judge's arrival. A small crowd had gathered, routine for quarterly court sessions, including several familiar faces from Helena's business district. Frederick Hargrove stood among them, his surprise evident when he spotted Thomas beside Eleanor. He approached with the same practiced charm he'd displayed previously. "Blackwood, didn't expect to see you in Helena." His eyes flicked to Teresa's gloved hand resting on a walking stick, a necessary support for her injured feet. "Heard there. Was trouble at your ranch?" "News travels fast," Teresa replied in Thomas's measured tones. "Small territory." Frederick smiled thinly. "Though perhaps not small enough for some operations. I understand you've had difficulty maintaining your stock counts recently." The implied threat that the Hargroves could continue rustling, whispering. Pines cattle with impunity hung in the air between them. Before Teresa could respond, a commotion at the street announced Judge Blackburn's arrival. The distinguished jurist descended from his carriage, acknowledging the gathered crowd with professional courtesy. Frederick tried to intercept him, but Eleanor moved more quickly, guiding Teresa forward to reach the judge first. Lawrence performed the introductions, his voice carrying clearly to those nearby. "Judge Blackburn, may I present Thomas and Eleanor Blackwood of Whispering Pines Ranch. They've brought a most pressing petition regarding water rights violations and systematic harassment by neighboring landowners." The judge, a sharp-eyed man, with a reputation for impartiality, assessed them thoughtfully. "Blackwood, I recall the name, Union veteran if memory serves?" "Yes, Your Honor," Teresa replied. 21st Massachusetts. "Good regiment," Blackburn nodded approvingly. "I'll review your petition with interest. Lawrence, bring them to my chambers after the morning session." Frederick Hargrove's expression darkened as he watched the exchange. Eleanor met his gaze steadily, allowing a hint of satisfaction to show in her smile. The first round had gone. To Whispering Pines, the judge's chambers presented a stark contrast to the formal courtroom: book-lined walls, comfortable leather chairs, and a massive oak desk covered with neatly arranged documents. Judge Blackburn received them with business-like efficiency, reviewing their petition and supporting affidavits with methodical thoroughness. "These allegations are serious," he said finally, removing his spectacles, "particularly coming from multiple property owners. The water diversion alone constitutes a significant violation of territorial statutes." "The harassment has escalated recently, Your Honor," Teresa explained, "including a suspicious fire just last week." The judge's expression hardened. "Criminal matters should be addressed by local law enforcement." "Sheriff Willard is Samuel Hargrove's cousin by marriage," Lawrence interjected delicately. "Previous complaints have gone uninvestigated." Blackburn's mouth tightened into a grim line. "I see." He shuffled the papers before him. "I'm granting your request for an injunction, effective immediately. The Hargroves are prohibited from entering Whispering Pines property under any circumstances, and from interfering with natural waterways affecting your land." Relief washed through Eleanor, but Teresa remained tense beside her. "With respect, Your Honor," Teresa said, "an injunction requires enforcement. Given Sheriff Willard's relationship to the Hargroves, I'll assign a federal marshal to deliver the injunction and monitor compliance," Blackburn interrupted. "This pattern of behavior extends beyond ordinary neighbor disputes into potential federal offenses, particularly regarding water rights on former government land grants." The meeting concluded with arrangements for Marshal Davies to accompany them back to Whispering Pines, injunction in hand. As they left the courthouse, Frederick Hargrove intercepted them on the steps, his charm evaporating to reveal cold fury. "This was a mistake," he said quietly. "My father won't recognize any paper from Helena. He'll recognize a federal marshal," Eleanor replied, "and federal charges if he chooses to ignore the court's order." Frederick's gaze shifted to Teresa. "You're playing a dangerous game, Blackwood. There are secrets worth more than water rights." A chill ran through Eleanor. Did he know? Had he somehow discovered Teresa's true identity? Teresa met his stare unflinchingly. Threats won't work, Hargrove. Not anymore. Marshal Davies, a weathered man with the watchful eyes of a veteran lawman, arrived at their hotel that evening to discuss travel arrangements. He would accompany them to Whispering Pines the following day, then continue to the Hargrove Ranch to serve the injunction. Judge Blackburn briefed me on the situation, he said, studying Teresa with open curiosity. You've held that property. What, 4 years now, despite regular harassment? It's home, Teresa said simply. Davies nodded. Seen your type before? Determined. The army teaches that, doesn't it? Sometimes, Teresa replied cautiously. Served yourself? Under Sheridan. You? Cavalry, 7th Illinois? Davies grinned suddenly. Know how to spot a fellow veteran. That stick you're using, holding it regulation style, even with those blisters I can see you're nursing? Teresa relaxed fractionally, recognizing a potential ally. Observant. Have to be in this job. Davies sobered. Hargroves won't take this lying down. Injunction's just paper unless it's backed by will to enforce it. We have the will, Eleanor assured him. Good. You'll need it. Davies rose to leave. We depart at dawn. Pack light and bring your weapons, just in case. After he'd gone, Teresa and Eleanor exchanged troubled glances. Frederick's comment about secrets, Eleanor began. Could be bluffing, Teresa said, but uncertainty shadowed her eyes. Or fishing for reaction. We should prepare for the possibility. He suspects something, Teresa nodded grimly. If he exposes me as a woman... The land grant would be invalidated, Eleanor finished. Everything you've built would be forfeit. They spent a restless night making contingency plans. If Teresa's identity was revealed, they had limited options. Sell quickly, flee to another territory, perhaps try to register the land in Eleanor's name as a widow. None guaranteed security or justice. Morning brought no clarity, only the necessity of action. They joined Marshal Davies at the livery stable as sunlight broke over the eastern mountains. The journey home to Whispering Pines lay ahead, and with it, confrontation with the Hargroves. As they mounted their horses, Eleanor found herself studying Teresa, the woman who had created Thomas Blackwood from necessity and determination. Regardless of what awaited them, Eleanor realized her own transformation had been equally profound. The proper Boston lady had vanished, replaced by someone stronger, more pragmatic, and utterly committed to defending what was hers. Their eyes met briefly as they rode out of Helena, a wordless communication passing between them. Whatever came. Next, they would face it together, not as the mail-order bride and her deceptive groom, but as true partners in every sense that mattered. The journey from Helena to Whispering Pines would normally take 3 days on horseback. Marshal Davies pushed their pace, reducing it to 2. He rode slightly ahead, his weathered face scanning the horizon with the practiced vigilance of a man who had survived both war and the dangers of frontier law enforcement. Hargrove will have sent word ahead, he commented during their first evening's camp. His kind always does, Teresa nodded, easing her boots off her still tender feet. Telegraph to Riverford would reach them by midday. Express rider to the ranch shortly after. Davies studied Teresa thoughtfully as she examined her blisters by firelight. You know their movements well. Have to, Teresa replied. Survival depends on it. Eleanor, returning from gathering more firewood, caught the marshal's appraising look. Though he had given no indication of suspecting Teresa's true identity, his perceptiveness was concerning. Marshal, Eleanor said, deliberately changing the subject, will you remain at Whispering Pines after delivering the injunction to the Hargroves? Davies fed another branch to the fire. Judge's orders are to ensure compliance. I'll stay as long as necessary, and if they choose to ignore the injunction, Teresa asked, Then they face federal charges, property seizure, possibly prison. Davy's expression hardened. Judge Blackburn doesn't issue orders he doesn't intend to enforce. Neither do I. His confidence was reassuring, but as they settled for the night, Eleanor found herself unable to sleep. The vast Montana sky stretched above their camp, stars burning with fierce clarity in the mountain air. Nearby, Teresa shifted restlessly. In her bedroll, similarly troubled. "Teresa," Eleanor whispered, ensuring Davies was out of earshot. "If Frederick has guessed, we'll face it," Teresa murmured back. "We've come too far to surrender now." Eleanor reached across the space between them, her fingers finding Teresa's in the darkness. The simple contact conveyed what words could not: solidarity, determination, and something deeper neither was yet ready to name. They reached the outskirts of Whispering Pines property by sunset the following day. The ranch appeared peaceful in the golden evening light, but Teresa immediately noticed subtle signs of disturbance: cattle clustering unnaturally in the south pasture, a broken rail on the corral. "Something's wrong," she said, urging her horse to move at a faster pace. As they approached the house, Martha burst from the front door, her usually composed face tight with worry. "Thank the Lord you're back," she cried, hurrying toward them. "The Petersons brought me home this morning, and I found—" She broke off, noticing Marshal Davies. "It's all right, Martha," Eleanor reassured her, dismounting. "This is Marshal Davies. He's here to help." Martha nodded once in acknowledgement before continuing. "They've poisoned the north well, Tom. Put something in it yesterday or the day before. Found 2 dead cattle nearby this morning." Teresa's face went rigid. "Well, poisoning was more than harassment. It was a direct threat to the ranch's survival." Davies dismounted, his expression grim. "You're certain it was deliberate?" "Smelled like coal oil," Martha confirmed. "And there were boot prints around. The well that don't belong to any of our people." The marshal turned to Teresa. "I need to see it, now." The north well lay a quarter-mile from the main house, a crucial water source for both livestock and household use during dry periods. As they approached, the evidence was unmistakable. 2 bloated cattle carcasses lay nearby, and the distinctive odor of coal oil tainted the air. Davies knelt to examine the ground around the well, then the water itself. "Deliberate," he confirmed, his voice cold with professional anger. "This crosses from property dispute into criminal territory." "It's always been criminal," Teresa said bitterly. "Only difference now is you're here to witness it." That night, they gathered in the ranch house to formulate a plan. The poisoned well would need to be pumped and cleaned, a labor-intensive process that would strain their already limited resources. More immediately, they needed to secure the main well near the house against similar sabotage. "I'll deliver the injunction to Hargrove first thing tomorrow," Davies said, studying the ranch maps Teresa had spread across the table. "Given this escalation, I'll be requesting additional marshals from the Helena office." "They won't arrive for days," Teresa pointed out. "Then we defend the property ourselves until they do." The marshal checked his service revolver with practiced efficiency. "Mrs. Blackwood seems handy with a rifle. Mr. Winters and the Peterson boys owe you support after your testimony helped their water rights claims. We'll establish a patrol rotation." Eleanor met Teresa's eyes across the table, a silent message passing between them. Neither had anticipated this level of formal support. For years, Teresa had fought alone, then with only Eleanor and Martha beside her. Now suddenly the law stood with Whispering Pines. Dawn found Marshal Davies preparing to ride to the Hargrove ranch, the official injunction secured in his saddlebags. Teresa insisted on accompanying him. "Not advisable," Davies argued. "Your presence could provoke them. My absence would show weakness," Teresa countered. "I need to be seen standing with the law, or they'll assume I'm hiding behind it." Eleanor watched this exchange with mounting concern. "Then I'm coming too." "Absolutely not," Teresa said sharply. "One of us needs to remain at the ranch. Besides, If Frederick does suspect something, the unspoken concern hung in the air between them. If Frederick had deduced Teresa's secret, having both of them at the Hargrove Ranch would be providing him with an opportunity to expose her before witnesses. "I'll stay," Eleanor conceded reluctantly, "but take Mr. Peterson with you. Martha sent word, and he's riding over this morning to help with the well." The hours following their departure stretched endlessly for Eleanor. She paced the ranch house, checked and rechecked her rifle, and scanned the horizon until her eyes ached. Martha attempted to distract her with household tasks, but Eleanor's mind remained fixed on Teresa, imagining confrontations ranging from tense words to outright violence. Shortly after noon, Mr. Peterson arrived with his two eldest sons, sturdy young men with their father's solemn demeanor and capable hands. Eleanor explained the situation, and they immediately set to work on the poisoned well, declining her offers of assistance with good-natured insistence that it was men's work. Left to her own devices again, Eleanor climbed to the ranch house, roof with her field glasses, a recent purchase from Helena, and scanned the rolling landscape for any sign of Teresa and the marshal's return. The Hargrove Ranch lay beyond the eastern ridge, approximately 3 hours' ride away. Even if all had gone smoothly, they wouldn't return before late afternoon. The sun had begun its westward slide when Eleanor spotted movement on the eastern trail, riders approaching at a steady pace. She counted 4 figures: Teresa, Davies, Mr. Peterson, and a 4th rider she didn't recognize. Tension coiled in her stomach. Had they brought one of the Hargroves back with them? She hurried down to the yard, rifle in hand, as the riders approached. Teresa rode at the front, her posture rigid but intact, no signs of violence or distress. Marshal Davies followed, his expression unreadable. Mr. Peterson looked troubled. The 4th rider, to Eleanor's surprise, was a young woman, perhaps 17 or 18, with dark hair spilling from beneath a battered hat and an expression of mingled defiance and fear. "Eleanor!" Teresa called as they entered the yard. "This is Jessie Hargrove," Samuel's youngest, Davies added. "She's seeking sanctuary." The girl dismounted awkwardly, revealing a crude bundle of possessions tied behind her saddle. Her clothes were boys' attire, worn trousers, a flannel shirt several sizes too large, and scuffed boots. A fading bruise marked her left cheekbone. "Mrs. Blackwood," Jessie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My brothers said you took in strays, said you might understand someone who doesn't fit where they're supposed to." Eleanor glanced at Teresa, whose face remained carefully neutral despite the loaded implication in the girl's words. "Come inside," Eleanor said gently. "We'll talk there." Once settled in the ranch house kitchen with coffee and Martha's fresh bread, Jessie's story emerged in halting fragments. She was Samuel Hargrove's only daughter by his second wife, who had died when Jessie was 12. Never favored like her brothers, she'd been treated as unpaid labor, cooking, cleaning, mending, while being denied education or any future beyond eventual marriage to whichever neighboring rancher might strengthen the Hargroves' position. "Father arranged it last month," she said, staring into her coffee cup. "Jim Taylor, 53 years old, buried 3 wives already. Said I'd be gone before Christmas. So you ran," Eleanor surmised. Jessie nodded. "Took my chance when the marshal and Mr. Blackwood arrived with that court paper. Everyone was shouting. Father was in a rage. Nobody noticed me slipping out with some clothes and my mother's locket." Davies leaned forward. "What exactly happened after we delivered the injunction?" Father tore it up. Jessie's voice hardened. "Said no judge in Helena could tell him what to do on his own property. Frederick tried to calm him down, saying they needed to be smart about it, but Father was already ordering the boys to saddle up." Teresa and Davies exchanged grim looks. "They're coming here," Teresa said. "Tonight, most likely." Davies nodded. "Figured as much when Samuel started bellowing about handling things the old way. That's why we rode back straight away." How many will come? Eleanor asked Jessie. Father, my 3 brothers, probably Taylor and his sons too. 8, maybe 10 men. Jessie hesitated. Frederick argued against it, said they should fight with lawyers, not guns. Father called him a coward and sent him back to Helena. This unexpected information shifted Eleanor's assessment of Frederick. Hargrove. Perhaps his sophistication wasn't merely a veneer over the same violence his father embraced. What about you, girl? Martha asked Jessie directly. Your own blood's likely to be riding against this ranch tonight. Where do you stand? Jessie lifted her chin. They stopped being my blood when Father sold me to a man older than himself. I stand with whoever stands against them. Teresa rose. Abruptly, we need to prepare. Davies, how many rounds do you carry? The next few hours transformed Whispering Pines into a makeshift fortress. The Peterson boys, grim-faced but determined, rode to gather reinforcements from neighboring ranches. Martha and Jessie prepared food and filled water barrels in case of a prolonged standoff. Eleanor and Teresa moved systematically through the property, securing outbuildings, gathering ammunition and establishing defensive positions. Like digging entrenchments at Petersburg, Teresa murmured as they stacked feed sacks to create a barricade near the barn. Marshal Davies surveyed their preparations with professional approval. Army trained you well, Blackwood. Had good officers? Teresa replied cautiously. Must have. Davies handed her a spare ammunition belt. Your positioning shows tactical thinking. Most ranchers just hunker in the main house. As dusk approached, their allies began arriving. The Petersons returned, with old Mr. Winters and his foreman, then the Larson brothers from the next valley. By nightfall, 11 defenders had assembled at Whispering Pines, armed and positioned strategically around the property. Teresa gathered them in the barn for final instructions, the oil lamps casting long shadows as she outlined potential approaches. The Hargroves might take. Eleanor watched her with quiet pride. In this moment, with lives depending on her leadership, Teresa inhabited her Thomas Blackwood persona completely, confident, authoritative, respected by the men who had come to fight alongside her. Remember, Teresa concluded, we defend only. No one fires unless fired upon. We have the law on our side, and we keep it there. As the defenders dispersed to their positions, Eleanor touched Teresa's arm. I'll take the house with Martha and Jessie. No. Teresa's voice was firm. You're the best shot among us. I need you on the North Ridge with your rifle. If they come through the pass, you'll see them first. Eleanor hesitated. And you? South approach with Davies. It's the most likely route. A tense silence stretched between them, filled with all they couldn't say before others. Finally, Eleanor nodded. Be careful, Thomas. Teresa's eyes softened momentarily at the deliberate use of her male name. You too, Eleanor. The night stretched interminably. Eleanor lay prone on the North Ridge, rifle ready, scanning the moonlit landscape below. Each rustle of pine needles, each distant owl call sent her heart racing, but hours passed without sign of the Hargroves. Shortly after midnight, a low whistle signaled rotation of the watch. Mr. Peterson's eldest son crawled up beside her. Any movement, he whispered. Nothing, Eleanor replied, shifting stiffly. You'd think they'd have come by now. Maybe the marshal scared them off after all. Eleanor shook her head. Samuel Hargrove doesn't scare easily from what I've heard. She made her way carefully back to the ranch house, where Teresa and Davies were consulting by lamplight. Nothing from the north, she reported. South and east approaches are clear too, Davies said, beginning to think they're waiting for daylight. Teresa studied the property map, frowning. Or coming from an unexpected direction. There's the old, a mining trail that runs behind the western ridge, rarely used, difficult terrain, but if they know about it, why wouldn't they have used it before in their harassment? Eleanor asked. Too risky for casual raids. But for a major confrontation, Teresa traced the route on the map. It would put them in position to fire down on the ranch yard from higher ground. Davies considered this. Worth checking, but we can't leave the other approaches unguarded. I'll go, Teresa decided. I know that trail best. Not alone, Eleanor insisted. Before Teresa could object, a piercing scream shattered the night, coming from the bunkhouse where Jesse had been resting. They rushed across the yard, Teresa and Davies, with weapons drawn. Inside, they found Jesse struggling in the grip of a burly man, while another figure moved toward the door. Jim Taylor. Jesse gasped as Teresa's entrance momentarily startled her captor. Let her go, Teresa ordered, leveling her pistol. Taylor sneered. This ain't your business, Blackwood. Samuel gave her to me fair and square. She's under my protection now, Teresa replied evenly. And you're trespassing on property under federal injunction. The second man, Taylor's son by the resemblance, made a sudden move toward the window. Davies' pistol cracked, sending splinters flying from the window frame inches from the younger man's head. Next one won't miss, the marshal warned. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Taylor roughly shoved Jesse toward Teresa, his face contorted. With rage, this ain't over. Samuel and the boys are coming, and that fancy paper from Helena won't stop lead. Where are they? Davies demanded. Taylor spat on the floor. Find out for yourself, lawman. A commotion outside interrupted the standoff, shouting, then a single gunshot. Taking advantage of the distraction, Taylor lunged at Teresa, bearing her to the ground while his son charged Davies. Eleanor fired her rifle into the ceiling. Stop! Now! The thunderous report in the confined space froze everyone momentarily. Outside, more shots rang out, followed by the unmistakable sounds of horses and men in combat. They're here! Teresa gasped, struggling beneath Taylor's weight. The diversion worked. Eleanor swung her rifle butt at Taylor's head, connecting with a solid crack that sent him slumping to the side. Davies had subdued the son with similar efficiency, binding his hands with a leather strap. Stay with Jesse, Teresa ordered Eleanor as she scrambled to her feet. Secure these two. Davies and I will... The bunkhouse door burst open, revealing Samuel Hargrove himself, a massive figure silhouetted against the night, shotgun in hand. Found you, Blackwood, he growled. Time to settle this permanent-like. Teresa's hand moved toward her fallen pistol, but Hargrove's shotgun was already aimed at her chest. Eleanor's rifle was empty, and Davies was still securing the younger. Taylor, Samuel Hargrove, a new voice called from behind him. You are in violation of a federal injunction and are currently committing armed trespass. Frederick Hargrove stepped into view, a document in one hand and a revolver in the other, pointed at his father's back. Frederick? Samuel's confusion was evident even in the dim light. What the hell are you doing? Preventing you from hanging for murder, Frederick replied coldly. The territorial governor signed this executive order an hour ago, authorizing immediate military intervention if the federal injunction was violated. There's a detachment of cavalry crossing the eastern ridge as we speak. Samuel half-turned, keeping his shotgun trained on Teresa. You're lying. No governor would move that fast. Judge Blackburn telegraphed him directly when Marshal Davies failed to report back on schedule. Frederick's voice remained steady. The Hargrove name still means something in Helena banking circles. I convinced the governor that swift action would prevent bloodshed and preserve territorial investments. Now lower the shotgun, Father, before you destroy everything I've built. For a breathless moment, Eleanor thought Samuel would fire anyway. Then with a roar of frustration, he swung the shotgun toward the ceiling. Frederick moved instantly, disarming his father with practiced efficiency that spoke of military training Eleanor hadn't suspected. 2nd Kansas Cavalry, he explained, noting her surprise as he secured the shotgun. Some habits remain useful in banking. Outside, the shooting had stopped. Through the door, Eleanor could see several Hargrove men being disarmed by Peterson and the other defenders. Dawn was breaking over the eastern hills, pale light revealing the aftermath of the brief, chaotic battle. "Is anyone hurt?" Teresa asked. Retrieving her pistol, two of Hargrove's men with minor wounds, Davies reported, entering after securing his prisoner. "None of ours." Frederick turned to Teresa, his expression unreadable. "Blackwood, we should talk, privately." Teresa tensed, and Eleanor moved protectively closer to her. "Anything you have to say can be said before my wife and Marshal Davies," Teresa replied evenly. Frederick's eyes moved between them, calculating. "Very well. I know, Thomas, about who you really are." The room went still. Eleanor's heart pounded in her throat as she waited for the accusation that would destroy everything. Teresa exposed as a woman, her land grant invalidated, Whispering Pines lost. "A war hero," Frederick continued. 21st Massachusetts, wounded at Antietam, decorated. "For valor at Gettysburg. I checked the records in Washington during my last business trip." Eleanor exhaled shakily as Teresa maintained her composure. "That was another life," Teresa said carefully, "one that gives you more legitimacy than my father ever had for his claims." Frederick glanced at Samuel, now secured and seething in the corner. "The territorial governor respects military service, especially Union veterans with distinguished records. When I explained the situation, he was quite receptive to protecting your interests." "Why help us?" Eleanor asked, still wary of this unexpected ally. Frederick adjusted his immaculate cuffs, incongruously formal amid the dust and disarray of the confrontation. "Enlightened self-interest, Mrs. Blackwood. Montana is changing. The future lies with stability, law, and commerce, not my father's brand of frontier justice. Your ranch represents the former, my father, unfortunately, the latter." "The cavalry?" Davies asked skeptically. "Will indeed arrive by midday." Frederick smiled thinly. "I may have exaggerated the immediacy to motivate my father, but the governor's order is genuine." As the sun rose fully over Whispering Pines, the Hargroves and their allies were secured in the barn under guard. Frederick, true to his word, produced the governor's order establishing military protection for the ranch until the territorial court could fully adjudicate the water rights dispute. Standing on the porch as the prisoners were loaded into wagons for transport to Helena, Eleanor slipped her hand into Teresa's. "It's over," she whispered. "We won." Teresa squeezed her hand gently. "Not entirely. Frederick knows something isn't right about my service record. He's choosing not to pursue it for now, but—" "For now is enough," Eleanor replied. "We've survived. The ranch is safe. We can face whatever comes next." Teresa turned to her, morning light illuminating the face that had become dearer to Eleanor than she had ever expected. No longer the mysterious Thomas Blackwood of her mail-order arrangement, nor simply Teresa the woman in disguise, but something more complex and precious. Her partner, her protector, her home. "Together," Teresa agreed softly. Around them, Whispering Pines came alive with the familiar sounds of a new day. Cattle moving in the pastures, chickens clucking in the yard, Martha calling orders to Jessie as they prepared breakfast for their defenders. The mail-order bride had found far more than the conventional marriage she had journeyed west expecting. She had found purpose, strength, and a love that defied convention, as vast and unyielding as the Montana sky, spreading endlessly above them. Winter descended on Whispering Pines with a ferocity that transformed the landscape. Snow draped the pine trees in crystalline mantles and smoothed the contours of the land into pristine white swells. The ranch buildings stood like islands in a frozen sea, connected by carefully maintained paths that Teresa and Eleanor shoveled clear each morning. 3. Months had passed since the confrontation with the Hargroves. Samuel and his two eldest sons now reside in the territorial prison in Helena, convicted of multiple offences, including well poisoning, criminal trespass, and violation of a federal injunction. Jim Taylor had received a lesser sentence for his role in the raid, but would remain incarcerated until spring. Frederick Hargrove, true to his word, had used his influence to expedite the legal proceedings. The territorial court had not only upheld Whispering Pine's water rights, but had awarded damages for the years of harassment and property destruction. The financial compensation wasn't substantial, but it provided enough to replace the poisoned well and build a modest reserve for spring planting. Life at the ranch had settled into a new rhythm. Jessie Hargrove had remained, finding in Martha an attentive teacher and in Eleanor a kind of older sister she had never known. The girl showed remarkable aptitude for ranching, taking to horses with natural talent and displaying a sharp mind for animal husbandry that even Teresa admired. "She has an eye for breeding stock," Teresa commented one evening as they reviewed the spring calving plans. "Noticed weaknesses in the McNally bull that I missed entirely." Eleanor smiled, watching Teresa's fingers trace bloodlines in the ranch ledger. These quiet evenings had become precious, the two of them working side by side before the fire, planning the ranch's future with shared purpose. "And how is she adjusting otherwise?" Eleanor asked. "It can't be easy, knowing her father and brothers are imprisoned because of us." Teresa's expression sobered. "Because of their own actions. But yes, it must be difficult. She doesn't speak of them." "She needs time," Eleanor said softly. "Some wounds heal slowly." Teresa glanced up, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Like yours? Coming to terms with all of this?" She gestured vaguely to encompass herself, the ranch. Their unusual arrangement, Eleanor considered the question. Her journey from Boston society lady to frontier rancher's wife had been extraordinary by any measure. Yet somehow, the deception that had initially shocked her now seemed almost incidental to the life they'd built. "My wounds have healed better than I ever expected," she said truthfully. "This place, this life, suits me in ways Boston never did." Teresa's smile held a warmth reserved only for their private moments. "You've changed it, you know. The ranch. Before you came, it was just survival. Now it's becoming something more." A comfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the howl of wind across the snow-covered valley. Outside, winter ruled with iron authority, but inside Whispering Pine's sturdy walls, something delicate and powerful continued to grow. Morning brought a rare break in the weather, clear skies and sunshine that transformed the snow-covered landscape into a dazzling spectacle. Teresa seized the opportunity to check the remote pastures, concerned about cattle that might have drifted during the recent blizzard. "I should be back by sunset," she told Eleanor over breakfast. "If the weather holds." Eleanor studied the sky through the kitchen window. "Take extra provisions anyway. Montana winters are deceptive." "Yes, ma'am," Teresa replied with a mock salute that earned her a playful swat with a dishcloth. "And wear the new scarf," Eleanor added, retrieving the blue woolen garment she'd knitted during the long winter evenings. "It matches your eyes." Teresa accepted the scarf with careful hands, momentarily at a loss for words. Such personal gifts remained rare between them, each one a small step across the boundaries they'd established months ago. "Thank you," she said finally, wrapping it around her neck. "It's perfect." After Teresa's departure, Eleanor turned her attention to the endless winter tasks: mending, inventory of preserved foods, preparations for spring planting. Jessie joined her in the kitchen, bringing a freshly gathered basket of eggs from the henhouse. "Snow's starting to drift again by the north pasture," the girl reported, setting down her basket. "Wind's picking up too." Eleanor glanced out the window with sudden concern. The brilliant morning sunshine had given way to high, thin clouds, and the distinctive rippling of snow across the yard indicated strengthening winds. "How long ago did Thomas leave?" she asked, catching herself. Jessie's expression revealed no reaction to the slip. "About 2 hours now, heading toward Broken Skull Ridge. The most distant section of their property," Eleanor thought, with growing unease. "If another storm was approaching, I'm sure he'll turn back if the weather worsens," Eleanor said, more to reassure herself than Jessie. The girl watched her with knowing eyes that sometimes seemed too perceptive for her 17 years. "You worry about him." "Of course. Winter in Montana Territory isn't to be taken lightly." Jessie separated the eggs with practiced efficiency. "It's more than that, though." Eleanor's hands stilled over her mending. "What do you mean?" "The way you look at each other." Jessie kept her eyes on her task. "Reminds me of my parents before Mother died. Like you share something nobody else understands." Heat rose in Eleanor's cheeks. Had they been so transparent, even to this observant girl? "Thomas and I have been through a great deal together," she said carefully. "I know about Teresa," Jessie said quietly. The simple statement fell between them like a stone into still water. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs as she struggled to maintain composure. "I don't understand what you mean," she finally managed. Jessie looked up, her young face solemn but kind. "I've known since that first night when Marshall Davies brought me here. I saw her changing bandages on her feet when she thought no one was looking, and later, there are ways a woman moves that can't be hidden completely." Eleanor sat heavily, in the nearest chair. "Does anyone else know?" "Martha, obviously. Probably Frederick Hargrove suspects something, but he has his reasons to keep quiet." Jessie resumed sorting eggs, as if they were discussing nothing more consequential than the weather. "Your secret is safe with me. This ranch saved my life. I'd never betray the people who gave me sanctuary." Relief mingled with lingering anxiety in Eleanor's chest. "Why tell me this now?" "Because winter makes people honest." Jessie shrugged. "And because you both deserve to stop pretending, at least here at home. It must be exhausting, always watching every word, every gesture." Before Eleanor could formulate a response, Martha burst through the door in a swirl of snowflakes, her face etched with concern. "Storm's coming," she announced grimly. "Big one by the look of those clouds. Where's Thomas?" "Broken Skull Ridge," Eleanor replied, rising immediately, "checking for stray cattle." Martha's expression darkened. "Fool girl will be caught in it. If she doesn't turn back now. These spring storms are the worst. Come on fast and stay mean." Eleanor moved quickly to the window. The transformation outside was alarming. The clear morning had surrendered completely to a steel-grey sky, and the wind was driving snow in horizontal sheets across the yard. "I'm going after her," she declared, already reaching for her coat. "You'll do no such thing," Martha countered. "Getting yourself lost won't help Teresa. I can't just wait here while she's caught in a blizzard." "She knows this land better than anyone," Martha said firmly. "She's weathered worse and found her way home." "But what if—" "Then 2 of you frozen won't improve matters," Martha interrupted, softening slightly. "Eleanor, have faith in her. She survived out here for years before any of us came along." Reluctantly, Eleanor conceded the wisdom in Martha's words. Still, as the storm intensified throughout the afternoon, her anxiety grew. She paced from window to window, watching the snow obliterate familiar landmarks until the world beyond the glass was nothing but swirling white. By evening, the blizzard had become a howling fury. Wind rattled the window frames and moaned down the chimney, drowning out conversation. Eleanor insisted on keeping lamps burning in every window, despite Martha's concerns about oil conservation. "She'll need light to find her way," Eleanor said, adjusting a lamp in the kitchen window. "Something to guide her home." As darkness fell, turning the white storm to impenetrable black, Eleanor's composure finally cracked. "We should have organized a search party. We should have—" "And how would they find her in this?" Martha gestured toward the raging storm. "Even the Petersons with their hunting dogs couldn't track in a whiteout." "Then what do we do?" Eleanor demanded, tears of frustration and fear welling in her eyes. Martha laid a weathered hand on her shoulder. "We pray, child, and we keep the fires burning." The night stretched interminably. Eleanor dozed fitfully in the chair nearest the door, startling awake at every change in the wind's pitch. Jessie maintained the fires, while Martha prepared hot broth and coffee, ready if, when, Teresa returned. Sometime after midnight, the storm's fury began to diminish. The shrieking wind softened to a mournful keen, and the snow fell more gently, no longer driven horizontally by gale-force gusts. Eleanor stood at the kitchen window, straining to see beyond the pool of lamplight. The easing storm had revealed the shadowy outline of the barn, but nothing moved in the darkness between. "She would have found shelter," Jessie said, joining Eleanor at the window. "There's the old trapper's cabin near Broken Skull. She might have holed up there, or a cave, or made a snow shelter," Martha added. "Teresa knows every survival trick in the book." Eleanor nodded mechanically, having repeated these same reassurances to herself throughout the endless night. Yet as the hours passed without a sign of Teresa, a cold dread settled in her stomach that had nothing to do with the winter air seeping through the window frames. Dawn arrived with merciful clarity. The storm had passed, leaving a transformed landscape of pristine drifts beneath a pale blue sky. Eleanor donned her warmest clothes and prepared to depart, ignoring Martha's continued objections. "I'm taking the strongest horse and supplies," she stated flatly. "If Teresa found shelter, she may be injured or unable to return on her own." "At least wait for the Peterson boys," Martha pleaded. "They'll come check on us after a storm like that." "There's no time," Eleanor replied, securing provisions in a saddlebag. "Every hour increases the risk." Jessie appeared from the barn, leading Eleanor's horse already saddled. "I've packed a medical kit," she said, handing Eleanor the reins, "and extra blankets strapped behind the saddle." Eleanor squeezed the girl's hand in silent gratitude. "If I'm not back by nightfall, we'll send help," Jessie promised, "but you'll both be back." Navigating the fresh snowdrifts proved challenging, even for Eleanor's powerful gelding. In places, the snow reached the animal's chest, forcing Eleanor to seek higher ground where wind had scoured the accumulation thinner. She followed Teresa's likely route based on their discussions the previous morning, heading toward the distant ridge marked by a distinctive rock formation that resembled a broken skull. The clarity that follows winter storms created a deceptive beauty, brilliant sunshine sparkling on untouched snow, the distant mountains etched sharply against the cobalt sky. But Eleanor knew the deadly reality beneath this serene tableau. Temperatures had plummeted during the night, cold enough to freeze exposed skin within minutes. If Teresa had been caught without shelter, Eleanor refused to complete the thought, focusing instead on scanning the landscape for any sign of movement, any disruption in the perfect snow blanket that might indicate Teresa's passage. 2 hours into her journey, she spotted the first clue, a broken pine branch protruding from a snowdrift at an unnatural angle. Drawing closer, Eleanor recognized it as a trail marker of the type Teresa sometimes used to identify paths through featureless terrain. Hope surging, Eleanor urged her horse forward with renewed determination. Beyond the marker, she could now discern the faint outline of a trail. Not footprints exactly, but a subtle depression in the snow where someone might have passed before the worst of the storm hit. The trail led toward a stand of pines nestled in a protected hollow. As Eleanor approached, she noticed smoke, the faintest wisp rising from among the trees. Her heart leapt. "Teresa!" she called, her voice carrying in the still morning air. Teresa! No response came, but the smoke continued rising, indicating a recent or current fire. Eleanor dismounted, tying her horse to a low branch, and proceeded, on foot, toward the source. The hollow sheltered a small, dilapidated cabin, presumably the trapper's shelter Jessie had mentioned. Its roof sagged dangerously under the snow's weight, and one wall leaned at a precarious angle, but smoke definitely rose from its crude stone chimney. "Teresa!" Eleanor called again, approaching the weathered door with mingled hope and trepidation. Rustling sound came from within, followed by a weak voice. "Eleanor!" Relief flooded through her as she pushed the door open. The cabin's interior was dark and smoky, illuminated only by a small fire in a crude hearth. On a makeshift bed of pine boughs near the flames lay Teresa, her face pale, but her eyes brightening at the sight of Eleanor. "You found me," Teresa said, her voice hoarse. "How did you—" "I followed your markers," Eleanor interrupted, rushing to kneel beside her. "Are you hurt? What happened?" Teresa grimaced as she tried to shift position. "Horse spooked a wolf and threw me. Think my leg's broken. Managed to drag myself here before the storm hit full force." Eleanor gently drew back the blanket Teresa had fashioned from her coat to reveal her right leg, swollen and discolored at the shin. The break appeared clean, without bone protruding through skin, but the injury was serious nonetheless. "We need to get you home," Eleanor said, already assessing how to transport Teresa through the deep snow. "I brought the gelding. He's strong enough to carry us both if we're careful." "How did you know where to look?" Teresa asked as Eleanor examined the makeshift splint she had applied to her leg. "I didn't. Not for certain." Eleanor busied herself, adjusting the splint, avoiding Teresa's gaze. "I just knew I had to find you." Teresa's cold fingers caught Eleanor's wrist, stilling her movements. "You could have frozen to death out here." "So could you," Eleanor countered, finally meeting Teresa's eyes. "Did you expect me to simply wait at the ranch while you—" She broke off, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. What?" Teresa prompted softly. "While you died alone in the snow," Eleanor finished, her voice barely audible. "I couldn't bear it, Teresa. Not when I—" Again she faltered. Years of propriety and restraint battling with the raw emotion the night's fear had unleashed. "When you what?" Teresa asked again, her fingers still encircling Eleanor's wrist, her eyes searching Eleanor's face with an intensity that belied her weakened state. "When I love you," Eleanor whispered, the admission finally breaking free after months of careful distance, of boundaries established and maintained, despite the growing connection between them. "I love you, Teresa. Not Thomas Blackwood, not the partnership or the ranch. You." Teresa's breath caught, her fingers tightening on Eleanor's wrist. For a terrible moment, Eleanor feared she had ruined everything. Their carefully balanced arrangement, the trust they had built, perhaps even their legal partnership. Then Teresa tugged gently, drawing Eleanor down beside her on the pine boughs. "I've been waiting months to hear those words," she murmured, lifting her free hand to touch Eleanor's cheek. "Afraid to hope for them. I didn't know myself until last night," Eleanor admitted. "When I thought I might lose you, it became so clear then. What you mean to me, what we've become to each other." Teresa's smile transformed her pale face, erasing the pain and exhaustion momentarily. "And what have we become, Eleanor Mills?" "Family," Eleanor said simply. "Home. Everything that matters." The kiss that followed held none of the hesitation of first loves and new beginnings. Instead, it carried the certainty of two lives already thoroughly intertwined, acknowledging what had grown between them through shared struggles and quiet evenings, through danger faced together and a future jointly planned. When they parted, Teresa rested her forehead against Eleanor's. "Jessie knows about me. She told me." Eleanor confirmed. "Just before the storm hit, she's known since she arrived, and she's kept our secret." Teresa looked thoughtful. Perhaps it's time we stopped thinking of it as a secret at all, at least within our own home. What do you mean? I mean that Thomas Blackwood must continue to exist for the world beyond Whispering Pines. The land grant, the water rights, our legal standing, all depend on maintaining that fiction. Teresa's fingers traced the line of Eleanor's jaw. But within these, the boundaries among those we trust, Martha, Jessie, perhaps a few others eventually, I don't want to pretend anymore. Not with you. The proposition held profound implications. They would create a dual existence, the public face of Thomas and Eleanor Blackwood, respectable ranchers, and the private reality of Teresa and Eleanor, two women building a life denied them by law and convention. It won't be easy, Eleanor cautioned. The risk remains. Everything worthwhile carries risk, Teresa replied. But we've faced worse together. She gestured to her splintered leg with a rueful smile. And clearly, I need you too much to maintain any pretense of self-sufficiency. Eleanor laughed softly, the sound bright in the smoky cabin. Then let's get you home, Teresa Blackwood. Our family is waiting. The journey back to the ranch proved arduous. Eleanor fashioned a travois from pine branches and blankets, securing Teresa as comfortably as possible before beginning the slow trek through the snow-laden landscape. The gelding labored valiantly, pulling the travois while Eleanor walked alongside, monitoring Teresa's condition and navigating the safest route home. By mid-afternoon, the familiar outlines of Whispering Pines appeared on the horizon. Smoke rose steadily from the chimney, and as they drew closer, Eleanor could make out figures in the yard, Martha and Jessie clearly watching for their return. When the women spotted them, they rushed forward through the snow, Jessie running ahead to help guide the horse, while Martha assessed Teresa's condition with her practical nurse's eye. "Broken tibia from the look of it," she pronounced. "Clean break, thank the Lord. We'll need to set it properly." "Already splintered it," Teresa said through gritted teeth, the journey having taken its toll despite Eleanor's careful handling. "Did what you could with what you had," Martha acknowledged. "Now we'll do better." As they carried Teresa into the house, Eleanor caught Jessie watching them with knowing eyes. "Found each other, did you?" the girl asked quietly, as Martha went ahead to prepare for setting the leg. "We did," Eleanor confirmed. "In more ways than one." Jessie nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. "Good. Family should be honest with each other." Family. The word Eleanor had used in the cabin now echoed back from this unlikely addition to their household. A Hargrove by birth, but increasingly a part of whatever unconventional family they were creating at Whispering Pines. "Yes," Eleanor agreed, watching as Martha and Teresa conferred about the broken leg, their dynamic shifting subtly now that pretense had been set aside. "Honesty within these walls, that's the foundation we're building on." Later that evening, with Teresa's leg properly set and bandaged, the four women gathered around the kitchen table for a simple but triumphant dinner. The ranch's mistress, no longer playing the role of Thomas Blackwood but fully herself, raised a cup of Martha's strong coffee in a toast. "To Whispering Pines," Teresa said, her eyes finding Eleanor's across the table. "And to the family we've found here." "To family," echoed Martha and Jessie, their voices blending in the warm kitchen. Eleanor lifted her own cup, heart full as she completed the circle. "To love that finds its own path, even through the deepest snow." Outside, stars emerged in the crystal-clear sky, watching over the ranch where a mail-order bride had discovered not the husband she'd expected, but the partner she'd never dared to dream of finding. Within these boundaries, they had created something rare and precious, a place where they could be truly themselves, protected by the very deception that had once threatened to keep them apart. Spring would come eventually, bringing new challenges and opportunities, but for now, In the heart of winter, Whispering Pines sheltered its own against the world outside, a sanctuary built on courage, perseverance, and the unexpected love that had blossomed between two women strong enough to forge their own destiny on the Montana frontier. Spring came to Whispering Pines with startling swiftness. The transformation from winter's stranglehold to verdant renewal seemed to happen overnight. Snowdrifts giving way to wildflower meadows, ice-locked streams bursting into cheerful, babbling brooks. The land awakened, and with it, the pace of ranch life accelerated dramatically. Teresa's broken leg had healed sufficiently for her to walk with only a slight limp, though Eleanor still insisted she use a cane for longer excursions. The enforced convalescence had changed their working dynamic. Eleanor had taken on many of Teresa's traditional responsibilities during the winter months, developing confidence in areas where she had previously deferred to her partner's expertise. "You've become quite the rancher," Teresa observed one morning as Eleanor returned from checking the pregnant heifers in the south pasture. "Those cattle respect you now." Eleanor dismounted with the easy grace she had developed over months of daily riding. "They respect consistency and confidence, which I've finally managed to project convincingly." "And the Winchester rifle doesn't hurt," Teresa added with a smirk, nodding to the weapon secured in Eleanor's saddle scabbard. "A lady should always accessorize appropriately," Eleanor replied primly, then broke into laughter at Teresa's expression. Such moments of lightness had become more frequent since their revelations in the trapper's cabin. Within the boundaries of Whispering Pines, they had gradually abandoned the strict performance of Thomas and Eleanor Blackwood, allowing their true relationship to exist openly among their small household. Martha had accepted the change with characteristic pragmatism. "About time you two stopped dancing around each other," she'd commented. "Been watching that particular courtship since Eleanor arrived." Jessie had blossomed in the honesty of their household, revealing a quick intelligence and determined spirit that reminded Eleanor increasingly of Teresa. The girl had appointed herself Teresa's assistant during her recovery, learning ranch management with remarkable aptitude. "She has a gift for the business side," Teresa confided to Eleanor one evening as they reviewed the account books. "Better head for figures than I ever had." The arrival of spring brought new considerations, however. The territorial court had scheduled the final hearing on the Hargrove land dispute for early June. Samuel and his sons remained in custody, but their sentences would end by midsummer. Frederick Hargrove had written from Helena, warning that his father's anger had only intensified during his imprisonment. "We should consider additional security measures," Teresa said, reviewing Frederick's letter at the breakfast table. "The legal victory is meaningless if we can't enforce it once they're released." Eleanor sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "What about expanding our operation? More hands on the ranch would mean more witnesses, more protection. More people means more risk of my secret being discovered," Teresa countered. "Not necessarily." Eleanor had clearly given this considerable thought. "We hire couples, families even. People with children are less likely to notice or question certain things, peculiarities. They'll be focused on their own concerns." Teresa considered this. It would change the nature of Whispering Pines, make it more of a community than a private refuge. "Perhaps that's exactly what we need," Eleanor suggested. "Strength in numbers, respectability through conventional appearances." The Hargroves would find it harder to target a thriving community than an isolated ranch run by a reclusive couple. The strategy made sense, but Teresa's hesitation was understandable. For years, she had survived by minimizing contact with others, by controlling every interaction to protect her carefully constructed identity. Inviting multiple families into their daily lives represented a significant risk. "We could start with one family," Eleanor compromised. "The Millers have been looking to leave their tenant farming situation near Riverford. Sarah Miller is expecting their third child, and James has experience with both cattle and carpentry." You've already spoken with them? Teresa asked, eyebrows raised. Eleanor had the grace to look slightly abashed. Preliminarily, during my last trip to town for supplies. Nothing definite, just testing the waters. Before Teresa could respond, Jessie entered with the morning mail. A rare delivery this early in the season, brought by a passing cattle driver headed north. "Letter from Helena," she announced, handing Teresa an official-looking envelope. "Court seal." Teresa opened it, scanning the contents with growing concern. "The hearing's been moved up, May 15th instead of June. Frederick believes his father's connections are trying to rush the process before we can fully prepare. That's less than 3 weeks away," Eleanor said, "and it coincides with the calving season." Teresa drummed her fingers on the table, calculating. "We can't both go to Helena during calving. The herd needs constant attention." "I'll go," Eleanor said immediately. "I can represent our interests, and Frederick will assist with the legal aspects." Teresa shook her head. "The court will expect Thomas Blackwood to appear in person for such an important ruling. Then we send Martha with the documentation as your proxy. Medical reasons, your leg won't work. Not for a final judgment of this magnitude." They sat in troubled silence, the dilemma hanging between them. Abandoning the ranch during calving season could mean significant financial losses. Yet failing to appear at the hearing might result in an unfavorable ruling that would threaten their water rights permanently. "What if," Jessie said slowly, setting down the coffee pot she'd been refilling, "you had another Thomas Blackwood?" Both women stared at her. "What do you mean?" Teresa asked. Jessie tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear, suddenly self-conscious under their scrutiny. "I've been thinking about this since winter, about how you maintain the Thomas identity. It's mostly clothes, posture and voice, the right hat, the right walk. Most people see what they expect to see." "You're suggesting someone else play the role of Thomas," Eleanor clarified. "For one court appearance," Jessie nodded. "Someone who knows the ranch, the water rights situation, all the details a judge might ask about." "That's an enormous risk," Teresa said, though she hadn't dismissed the idea outright. "Impersonation could bring legal consequences far worse than losing the water rights case." "Only if discovered," Jessie persisted. "And the judge has never met Thomas in person, has he? Just reviewed affidavits and documents?" Eleanor's mind raced with the possibilities. Who would do it? James Miller is too tall, and Mr. Peterson too old to pass for Thomas's age. Jessie straightened her shoulders. "I would." Silence fell over the kitchen as Teresa and Eleanor processed this unexpected offer. "You?" Teresa finally managed. "Jessie, you're 17 and a girl." "So were you when you first became Thomas," Jessie pointed out. "I'm nearly the same height as you. I've been watching how you move, speak, interact when you're being Thomas. I've studied the court documents. I know every detail of the water rights case." "It's too dangerous," Eleanor protested. "If you were discovered—" "What's the alternative?" Jessie challenged. "Teresa can't be in 2 places at once. The ranch needs her expertise during calving, and the court needs Thomas Blackwood in Helena." Teresa and Eleanor exchanged troubled glances, both recognizing the logic in Jessie's argument despite their reservations. "Let me try," Jessie urged. "Let me show you I can do it." After a long moment, Teresa nodded reluctantly. "Show us." What followed was an extraordinary transformation. Jessie borrowed Teresa's clothing, bound her chest as Teresa did, and adopted the posture and mannerisms she had observed over months of careful study. Her naturally low-speaking voice deepened further as she practiced Thomas's measured cadence and distinct speech patterns. By evening, even Martha was impressed by the performance. "Uncanny," she admitted, watching Jessie move about the kitchen in Thomas's deliberate gait. "If I didn't know better—" "It's more than appearance," Teresa cautioned. "The judge will ask specific questions about the ranch, about our water usage, in patterns, about incidents with the Hargroves. Test me, Jessie challenged, sitting across from Teresa at the kitchen table, her posture a mirror image of the older woman's. For 2 hours, Teresa grilled Jessie on every aspect of the water rights case, from technical details about watershed management to specific instances of Hargrove interference. The girls' responses were measured, informed, and delivered with Thomas Blackwood's characteristic reserve. "She's been paying attention to everything," Eleanor marveled. "All these months." "I had to," Jessie said simply. "Understanding how this ranch works, how you both protect it, it's been my survival too." As the impromptu examination concluded, Teresa leaned back in her chair, visibly torn between admiration for Jessie's abilities and concern for the risks involved. "Even if I can convince the judge," she said, "there's Frederick to consider. He knows Thomas personally. Frederick Hargrove wants the case resolved in our favor," Eleanor reminded her. "His business interests in Helena depend on stability and legal precedent. If we inform him discreetly of our alternative representation, he might cooperate, or he might use it as leverage against us," Teresa countered. "I don't think so," Jessie interjected. "Frederick broke with his father over this case. He publicly supported our claim against his own family. Why would he sabotage that position now?" The debate continued late into the night, weighing risks against necessities, exploring alternatives only to dismiss them as impractical. By morning, a tentative plan had formed. Jessie would continue practicing the Thomas Blackwood persona, while Eleanor drafted a carefully worded letter to Frederick, proposing a private meeting in Riverford before the Helena hearing. The next 2 weeks transformed Whispering Pines into a peculiar training ground. While Teresa managed the beginning of calving season, Eleanor and Martha worked with Jessie to perfect her performance. They staged mock interrogations, practiced handwriting to match Thomas's signature, and refined the small details that would sell the deception: how Thomas held a hat, signed his name, and addressed authority figures. Frederick's response arrived 5 days later, agreeing to the Riverford meeting, but offering no hint of his reaction to their implied proposal. Eleanor would go alone, leaving Teresa at the ranch to continue Jessie's preparation. The journey to Riverford gave Eleanor ample time to consider the audacity of their plan. Asking Frederick Hargrove, son of their sworn enemy, to collude in a deception that might constitute legal fraud demonstrated how desperate their situation had become. Yet Frederick had proven an unexpected ally in the past, his business interests in Helena aligning with Whispering Pines' stability rather than his father's vendetta. Eleanor found him waiting at the small hotel that served as Riverford's only respectable meeting place for business matters. As always, Frederick was impeccably dressed, his Eastern education and banking connections evident in his appearance and manner. "Mrs. Blackwood," he greeted her formally, rising from his table in the otherwise empty dining room. "Your letter was intriguingly vague." "Mr. Hargrove," Eleanor replied, taking the offered seat, "I appreciate your discretion in meeting me." Frederick signaled the proprietor for coffee before continuing. "I presume this concerns the rescheduled hearing? A transparent attempt by my father's allies to catch you unprepared, I should note." "Precisely," Eleanor confirmed. "The timing creates a significant hardship. Calving season requires Thomas's expertise at the ranch, yet his presence is also required in Helena." Frederick studied her with shrewd eyes. "And you're proposing—" Eleanor took a deep breath. "An alternative representation at the hearing." "I see." Frederick's expression revealed nothing. "And who would this alternative representation be?" "Jessie." Frederick's surprise was evident, though he quickly masked it. "My sister, playing the role of Thomas Blackwood." He laughed softly, though without mockery. "Bold, potentially disastrous." "She's remarkably convincing," Eleanor said. and knows the case thoroughly. I'm sure she does. Jessie was always the cleverest of the Hargroves, though father never saw it. Frederick tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table. But why involve me? Why not simply proceed with this masquerade and hope for the best? Because you know, Thomas, Eleanor said carefully, your support would be valuable in establishing credibility with the court, and because I might otherwise expose the deception, Frederick finished. A reasonable concern. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. Would you? Frederick considered the question, taking his time. My father believes I've betrayed the family by supporting your water rights claim. In his eyes, I'm already a traitor to the Hargrove name. He smiled thinly. What's one more betrayal? Then you'll help us? I'll consider it, Frederick replied. But first, tell me, why did Jessie volunteer for this risk? She's safe at your ranch beyond father's reach. Why endanger herself? The question caught Eleanor off guard. You'd have to ask her directly. I'm asking you, Mrs. Blackwood. Frederick's tone sharpened. What hold do you have over my sister? None, Eleanor said firmly. Jessie makes her own choices. She's found purpose at Whispering Pines, a place where her intelligence and abilities are valued rather than dismissed. Frederick studied Eleanor for a long moment, then nodded slowly. That sounds like Jessie, always seeking approval that father reserved for his sons. He seemed to have come to a decision. Very well, I'll support this deception on one condition. Which is, after the hearing, regardless of outcome, Jessie comes to Helena for a proper education. Frederick raised a hand to forestall Eleanor's objection. Not to live with me, not to be separated from her new family, but to attend Miss Winslow's seminary for young ladies 3 days each week. I'll arrange transportation and cover all expenses. Eleanor blinked in surprise. You want to provide her with formal education? She deserves the opportunities father denied her, Frederick said simply. A mind like Jessie's shouldn't be limited to ranch life, no matter how fulfilling that might be. The unexpected proposal revealed depths to Frederick Hargrove that Eleanor hadn't anticipated. This wasn't manipulation or control, but genuine concern for his sister's future. Jessie would need to decide for herself, Eleanor said carefully, but I believe she would welcome such an opportunity. Then we have an agreement in principle. Frederick extended his hand. I'll meet you in Helena 2 days before the hearing to review our strategy. As Eleanor rode back to Whispering Pines, she reflected on the curious alliance they had formed with this most sophisticated of the Hargroves. Frederick's motivations remained somewhat mysterious, but his affection for Jessie seemed genuine, as did his commitment to the legal principles at stake in their case. Teresa was waiting anxiously when Eleanor returned, her expression shifting from concern to cautious optimism as Eleanor recounted the meeting. Education for Jessie, Teresa mused. That's not what I expected him to demand. Nor I, Eleanor agreed. But it suggests he truly has broken with his father's values. They presented Frederick's proposal to Jessie that evening. The girl's reaction was immediate and emphatic. Yes, she said, eyes bright with excitement. A formal education. That's more than I ever dared hope for. It would mean dividing your time, Teresa cautioned. 3 days in Helena, 4 at the ranch. I can manage, Jessie insisted, and think what I could bring back to Whispering Pines. New knowledge, new approaches to ranch management, books. Her enthusiasm was infectious, dissolving the last of Teresa's reservations about involving her in their plan. The die was cast. Jessie would travel to Helena as Thomas Blackwood, with Eleanor accompanying her as the devoted wife, and Frederick providing the necessary social connections to navigate the territorial capital. The final week of preparation passed in a blur of activity. Teresa's coaching sessions with Jessie grew increasingly specific, covering every possible question the judge might ask. Eleanor altered one of Thomas's suits to fit Jesse's slighter frame while maintaining the masculine silhouette. Martha packed provisions for the journey and fretted over details like the proper waxing of Thomas's signature boots. The night before their departure, Teresa asked for a moment alone with Jesse. Eleanor respected their privacy, understanding that Teresa needed to share something personal with the girl who would temporarily assume her male identity. Later, when they were preparing for bed, Eleanor asked gently, "What did you tell her?" Teresa sat on the edge of their bed, absently rubbing her healing leg. "I told her that Thomas Blackwood was born from necessity, but has become something more. A shield that protects not just me, but all of us who call Whispering Pines home. I told her that by wearing his name, even briefly, she becomes part of that protection." Eleanor sat beside her, taking Teresa's hand. "And how did she respond?" "She said she'd already figured that out months ago." Teresa smiled ruefully. "That girl sees more than she lets on." "She reminds me of you," Eleanor observed. "The same determination, the same willingness to defy convention for what matters." Teresa squeezed Eleanor's hand. "She reminds me of both of us. Your intelligence, my stubbornness. The daughter we might have raised together in another life," Eleanor said softly. The words hung in the air between them, a shared acknowledgement of the unconventional family they had created against all odds. "In this life," Teresa corrected, gently. "Different path, same destination. Morning arrived clear and cool, ideal for traveling." Jesse appeared for breakfast dressed fully as Thomas Blackwood, the transformation so complete that even Martha did a double take. "Uncanny," the housekeeper muttered, setting down a plate of eggs with more force than necessary. "Like seeing a ghost." Teresa watched with critical attention as Jesse ate, moved, prepared for the journey, making final mental notes on posture, mannerisms, habits that might need adjustment. But even her exacting standards found little to correct in Jesse's. "Performance, remember?" Teresa said as they prepared to depart. "Judge Blackburn values directness. Answer his questions honestly whenever possible. Deflect diplomatically when necessary. And if Frederick seems to be steering the conversation toward dangerous territory, follow my lead," Eleanor added, securing the last bag to the wagon. "I've got it," Jesse assured them, her voice pitched perfectly in Thomas's measured tones. "We've rehearsed every possibility." Teresa clasped Jesse's shoulder, a deliberately masculine gesture that the girl returned with equal confidence. "Safe travels, Thomas. Protect our land." "I will," Jessie promised, settling her hat at the angle Teresa had taught her. "You focus on those new calves. We'll have good news when we return." As the wagon pulled away, Eleanor glanced back to see Teresa standing in the yard, her figure growing smaller with distance, but her presence no less powerful. They were taking an enormous risk, placing their future in the hands of a 17-year-old girl with the courage to challenge conventions as boldly as Teresa had done. Yet, as Eleanor turned to study Jesse's profile, determined, focused, embodying the very spirit of Whispering Pines, she felt a surge of confidence. Their unconventional family had faced threats before and emerged stronger. This challenge would prove no different. The road to Helena stretched before them, carrying not just Eleanor and the temporary Thomas Blackwood, but the hopes of the home they had all found together, a sanctuary built through deception, yet sustained by the most genuine of loves. The Helena courthouse stood imposing against the spring sky, its brick facade and granite steps lending gravity to the proceedings within. Eleanor smoothed her best dress, dark blue, with subtle embroidery at the collar, and took a steadying breath before turning to Jessie. "Ready?" she asked quietly. Jessie, nearly unrecognizable as Thomas Blackwood in the carefully tailored suit and low-brimmed hat, gave a single determined nod. Their weeks of preparation had culminated in this moment, a high-stakes performance with their future at Whispering Pines hanging in the balance. Frederick met them at the courthouse entrance, impeccable in a tailored suit that spoke of Eastern refinement. His critical eye assessed Jesse's transformation with grudging approval. "Remarkable," he murmured, "though we'll need to keep interaction with court officials brief and formal." Inside, the courtroom buzzed with subdued conversation. Several familiar faces from previous hearings nodded in recognition as Thomas and Eleanor took their seats beside their lawyer. Frederick positioned himself strategically nearby, close enough to provide support, yet maintaining the appearance of professional distance appropriate for opposing parties. When Judge Blackburn entered, the room fell silent. The judge's reputation for impartiality and strict adherence to territorial law had only grown since their initial petition. He scanned the courtroom with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Blackwood water rights case," he announced without preamble. "I see all parties are present. Mr. Hargrove Sr. remains in territorial custody. I understand." "Yes, Your Honor," Frederick confirmed, rising briefly. "I represent the Hargrove interests in this matter." The judge nodded, then turned his attention to Thomas. "Mr. Blackwood, your recovery is progressing well, I trust. Marshal Davies mentioned your injury when he filed his report." Jessie rose, standing with the straight-backed posture Teresa had drilled into her. "Much improved, Your Honor. Thank you for asking." Her voice carried just the right note of measured respect that characterized Teresa's Thomas Blackwood persona. For the next hour, the court reviewed evidence already presented in previous hearings. Eleanor watched Jessie with carefully concealed anxiety, but the girl handled each question with remarkable poise, never elaborating unnecessarily yet providing sufficient detail to demonstrate intimate knowledge of the ranch and its water resources. When the questioning turned to specific incidents of Hargrove interference, Jessie recounted the events with precision, neither exaggerating or minimizing the impact on Whispering Pines. Frederick, true to his word, corroborated key points that supported their claim, effectively undermining his father's position while maintaining his appearance of proper legal representation. Given the documented pattern of harassment and the clear violation of established water rights, Judge Blackburn stated finally, this court issues a permanent injunction against Samuel Hargrove and his heirs regarding any interference with Whispering Pines ranch water access. He fixed Frederick with a pointed look. You will convey to your father upon his release that violation of this order will result in immediate seizure of Hargrove properties and additional criminal charges. Understood, Your Honor, Frederick replied solemnly. Furthermore, the judge continued, damages in the amount of $2,000 are assessed against the Hargrove estate, payable to Whispering Pines Ranch within 30 days. He tapped his gavel once, decisively. This matter is resolved. As they exited the courthouse into the bright spring afternoon, Eleanor barely contained her elation. They had won, completely and unequivocally. Whispering Pines was secure not just for the moment, but permanently protected by territorial law. You were extraordinary, she whispered to Jessie once they were safely in their rented carriage. The girl slumped slightly, releasing the rigid posture she had maintained throughout the hearing. I thought he suspected something when he asked about the injury, she admitted. My heart nearly stopped. You handled it perfectly, Eleanor assured her. Even Frederick was impressed. As if summoned by his name, Frederick approached their carriage, raising a hand in polite greeting. A moment, if you please. Eleanor nodded, and he climbed in, sitting opposite them. Masterfully done, he said to Jessie. Father would be furious. To know he was outmaneuvered by his own daughter. Jessie smiled wryly. He always underestimated what women could accomplish. Indeed. Frederick's expression softened slightly. I've made arrangements with Miss Winslow. You can begin your studies. Next month, if that suits you. Jessie glanced at Eleanor, who nodded encouragingly. Yes, Jessie said. "I'd like that very much." "Excellent." Frederick handed Eleanor a sealed envelope. "The deed to the North Quarter section adjoining your property. I've acquired it from the bank and am transferring ownership to Whispering Pines as an additional settlement." Eleanor stared at the envelope in shock. "That's extraordinarily generous." "It's strategic," Frederick corrected, though a hint of genuine warmth underlay his businesslike tone. "That parcel contains the headwaters of the creek that runs through both our properties. By feeding it to Whispering Pines, specifically to a ranch managed by my sister's newfound family, I ensure neither father nor my brothers can ever again interfere with the water supply." The implication was clear. Frederick had permanently protected them against future Hargrove attacks by placing the most valuable water rights under their control. "Why?" Jessie asked bluntly, momentarily forgetting her Thomas persona. Frederick's expression turned contemplative. "Perhaps I'm making amends for our family's actions. Perhaps I'm securing my own interests against father's self-destructive vendettas." He adjusted his hat, preparing to depart. "Or perhaps I simply recognized which side of this conflict represented the future rather than the past." With that cryptic statement, he exited the carriage, pausing only to add, "I'll arrange transportation for Jessie's school days. Good day, Mrs. Blackwood, Thomas." The journey back to Whispering Pines seemed to fly by, their spirits buoyed by victory and Frederick's unexpected gift. As the familiar outlines of the ranch appeared on the horizon, Eleanor felt a surge of emotion. This place that had once represented deception and compromise had become truly home, housing the family she had never imagined finding. Teresa awaited them in the yard, her stance betraying anxiety despite her outwardly calm expression. When she caught sight of their triumphant faces, she abandoned all pretense of restraint, striding forward to meet the wagon. "We won!" Eleanor called, unable to contain her joy a moment longer. "Permanent injunction and damages. And Frederick deeded us to the North Quarter with the headwaters." Teresa's face transformed with disbelief and elation. Jessie jumped down from the wagon and embraced her, still half in her Thomas persona, despite the very unmasculine display of emotion. "You should have seen her," Eleanor said, descending more sedately. Even the judge was convinced. Later that evening, after a celebratory dinner where Martha outdid herself with a feast worthy of their victory, the four women gathered on the porch to watch the sunset paint the Montana sky in triumphant golds and crimson. "So," Martha said, breaking the contented silence, "what happens now, with all of us, I mean?" Teresa looked at Eleanor, their hands finding each other instinctively. "We expand," Teresa said. "Carefully, with people we trust. The Millers first. As Eleanor suggested, we build something bigger than just surviving. A real community," Eleanor agreed, "where Thomas Blackwood remains the public face, but within these boundaries we create something different, something true. And I'll bring new ideas from my schooling," Jessie added eagerly. "Modern methods, perhaps even machinery for the larger operation." Martha snorted softly. "Machinery. Next you'll be talking about one of those telephone contraptions." Eventually, Teresa surprised them by saying, "The world is changing, Martha. We need to change with it, but on our own terms." As darkness settled over Whispering Pines, Eleanor reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. A little over a year ago, she had boarded a stagecoach as a desperate, destitute Boston lady seeking security through a mail order. Marriage to a stranger. She had found deception, then truth, danger, then safety, and finally, unexpectedly, love. The ranch lights glowed warmly against the gathering night, beacons of the sanctuary they had created through courage, determination, and an unwavering commitment to protecting what mattered. Beyond their boundaries, the world might never understand or accept what they had built together. Within them, they had found freedom to be their authentic selves. I received another letter today, Teresa said quietly, when Jessie and Martha had gone inside. From a woman in Illinois. Her husband died in a mining accident, leaving her with 2 children and mounting debts. He's considering coming west, Eleanor understood immediately. You want to help her? We could, Teresa replied. Not as Thomas and Eleanor Blackwood this time, but as Whispering Pines Ranch, a place that offers second chances to those who need them. Eleanor leaned her head against Teresa's shoulder, considering the proposition. Their own deception had been born of necessity, yet had created something genuine and precious. Perhaps they could transform that experience into a deliberate mission, creating a haven for others who needed to reinvent themselves, to find acceptance beyond society's rigid expectations. Write to her, Eleanor decided. Tell her there's a place here if she's willing to work hard and keep certain truths sacred. Teresa pressed a kiss to Eleanor's hair, murmuring, I never expected this when I placed that advertisement for a mail-order bride. I was only trying to protect my land, and instead I found everything I never knew I was missing. Teresa's arm tightened around Eleanor's shoulders. A partner, a family, a home that's more than just property to defend. As the stars emerged above Whispering Pines Ranch, Eleanor Mills, once a mail-order bride, now so much more, gazed up at the vast Montana sky with profound gratitude. The deception that had brought her west had led to the deepest truth of her life. Love finds its own path, even when that path winds through danger, disguise, and defiance of every convention. Behind them, the ranch house glowed with warmth and life. Before them stretched a future they would shape together, not as the world dictated, but as their hearts demanded. It was more than enough. It was everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.